In this tutorial, which is aimed at beginners, we're going to draw the Taj Mahal in Adobe Illustrator. That's going to be great practice for some basic techniques and tools. Then we'll animate that drawing in Adobe After Effects using trim paths, a really useful little function that you'll then be able to apply to any stroke you wish in the future. And then we'll build on that basic animation by adding one effect to make the image have this cool neon-like look. Carlos here from Feel Good Footage. I'm a producer, director and content creator in the UK, and my channel aims to help you make better content, whether that's with equipment, workflow, or in this case, technique. So if that sounds interesting, consider subscribing. I've been filming and editing for the best part of 2 decades, have been progressing in After Effects for a couple of years, and in the last year have really fallen in love with Illustrator. For me, there are a few things more satisfying than drawing something and then being able to animate it yourself. I'm always learning new things every day, but if you're taking your first steps in these wonderful applications, hopefully this tutorial will prove useful. To start, I want a reference image that I'm going to draw over. I like this site, unsplash.com, which is full of free to use pictures donated by generous image makers from across the world. I've been lucky enough to travel to India twice for work, and it's a fascinating place. Never visited the Taj Mahal, but I am preparing a little animation project where I'll need some global landmarks, so this could be the first of those. And obviously all the techniques from this you can apply to any other building you might be interested in recreating. For example, in a recent video about installing a mesh Wi-Fi system into my home, I took a quick photo of my house on my phone and then drew over that before animating it as the basis of a little graphic I needed to create. So it's just a useful way to draw a building accurately and then add a bit of interest to the motion graphic. I'm after a view that is straight onto the building with this reflection pool in the foreground, which I might use later on. But really, as long as the image is good quality, just about anything will work. I'll go with this one by this creator. And just to give them their credit, here they are. Next, I'll open up Illustrator and choose the HD 1920 by 1080 artboard preset. One of the wonders of Illustrator is you're working with vectors, so you can at any time scale them up or down without losing resolution. But if I'm drawing with the intention of animating, I tend to work with the artboard size that matches the video resolution I'll be using later, just so I have that as a reference throughout. I'll also point out that I've got smart guides activated. I'll make use of that a lot. Next, I'll place the Taj Mahal photo I downloaded into my artboard, bringing it in as a template, which will lock the layer and automatically reduce its opacity. As you can see immediately, it's a very high quality image dwarfing the artboard, but that's fine. I can scale down my drawing later. And because it is very high quality, it has lots of details I can use for inspiration if I colour and add texture to my drawing at a future point. But for today, we'll just concentrate on shapes and outlines. For After Effects, we'll want to have everything organised in layers before we import this file. We'll discuss why later. But for now, that means I'm going to try and organise my layers in Illustrator right from the beginning. I'm going to draw around the main outlines section by section. I've set the fill to none, stroke to 1 pixel. So I'll start with what I'll call the main building, and for the first bit I'll just use the rectangle tool. Since the sides of the main building fall away at a slight angle, I'll use the pen tool to go around that. And then to get the parapet, which is parallel, I'll simply use the selection tool, select the path, then Alt plus drag to create a copy, which I'll slide up. To make the opposite side, I'll select both of those paths and use the shortcut Ctrl plus G or Command plus G on a Mac to group those paths together. With that group selected, I'll simply Alt drag to create a copy of that group. Then with that new group selected, I'll use Object, Transform, Reflect 90 degrees across the vertical axis. I'll just spend a moment making sure both sides are aligned with each other, and again Smart Guides is very useful for this sort of thing. And I'm also going to duplicate the very first rectangle that I drew just to allow me to make a parapet for that part of the building. And again, that duplicate is just created by selecting the path and Alt dragging. That Alt drag to copy a shape is absolutely one of the most useful shortcuts that you're going to use again and again. Next up, the big dome, where we'll use the pen tool. And here we'll use the idea of symmetry to make a great looking, completely balanced shape. So rather than trying to draw the entire shape, I'll just draw half. The smart guide tells me when I'm directly beneath the starting point, and using shift restricts the pen to 90 degrees, in this case producing a vertical line to complete the path. Then it's another reflect job to make the other half, which I'll snap together and use the vertical align to ensure they're level. And just to clarify, this is where those align tools can be found. Then Shift plus M takes me to the wonderful Shape Builder tool, and with a little drag it's now one shape. For the spire, with its little spheres and crescent details, I'll use the same draw half of it and reflect approach. And again I'll use the Shape Builder tool to join the two halves together. In terms of details, I'm going to simplify a lot, but I will take a couple of the rings around the dome. I'll use the ellipse tool, and when I'm happy with the curve of just one, copy that to make the others. Then I'll select them and use the Shape Builder, and holding Alt down, remove all the sections I don't need. So for the paths on the outside of the building, I'm holding Alt to remove the unwanted parts as I drag across. That will delete them. For the paths within the building, within the dome, I can just use the Shape Builder without pressing Alt, just dragging, and that will join everything that I want together. It's the big arch next with the pen tool, again drawing half, reflecting and joining. And once that's done, I can just copy that shape and scale it down to make some of the smaller arches, aligning them as required, then grouping them and copying the pair to make their opposites before aligning these with each other. For the arches that are at an angle, I'll need to draw one. It's a bit trickier to get the angles right, but when you're happy, that can be copied and grouped, and the pair can be copied for the other side. But in this case, they need to be reflected as well. Then I'll save the project. To be honest, I should have done that first. Then for these little arch windows within the big arch, I'll adapt the arch shape we have already drawn. The good thing about this building is that there is a lot of repeated design which fosters its harmony. A quick peek at the drawing with the reference layer switched off. Nice. Now, one thing I noticed is that when I copied those arches and scaled them down, the stroke width scaled down as well. That may be what you want sometimes, but for this, I just want to keep all the strokes at 1 pixel for now and change later. So to ensure that happens, open the transform window, select an object, and make sure Scale Strokes and Effects is unchecked. Next, what I'll call the front wall. Very simple with the rectangle tool. I just make sure it covers the main building elements I've already drawn, as this will keep things nice and neat if I colour the drawing in the future. Once again, with smart guides, it's much easier to keep everything nicely aligned. I'd say the trickiest thing with this image is going to be the towers. Through a combination of the camera not being exactly square onto the subject, or lens distortion due to it being a very wide angle, some of those towers have a distinct lean to them, and I'm guessing in the real world they don't. So when I draw, I'm going to have to correct for that, and my drawing lines are going to be quite different from the reference, but that's fine. It's only a reference after all. Again, I'm going to draw one tower and then duplicate it as required. I'll use the pen tool to draw half the main tower shape, and then use the direct selection tool to give that shape a tapered edge. Then our old friend reflect and copy with Shape Builder to join. The tower has this bulging detail like a ring. I'll mimic that by first using the ellipse tool to make an ellipse with the correct bend, then duplicate that and use Shape Builder to trim away what I don't want. I'll use the pen tool to draw one half of the lower part of the shape. Reflect and copy that, and join that with Shape Builder. Pressing Alt with Shape Builder allows me to remove the parts I don't want, while dragging will join the shapes I want to unite, which will smooth out the edge nicely. I'll group that shape. Then it's just a case of duplicating that ring group a couple of times and sliding those copies down the tower, scaling them a bit as those are larger. I'll use the Align function to make sure they're all sitting in the middle of the tower. With the Align tool, just check you are, in this case, aligning to the selection as opposed to the artboard. The top of the tower is this turret. I'll draw half the main shape with the pen tool. When I reflected my first attempt, I realized I'd made a mistake. The apex of the turret is a corner. It needs to be a curve. So I deleted the copy and corrected that mistake. To change this, you use the anchor point tool, which allows you to convert an anchor point from a corner to a curve. Since at the moment it's a corner, when I use the anchor point tool on it, it makes it a curve and produces these Bezier handles. Then by switching to the direct selection tool, I can refine that curve to get it where I want to. And to move just one of the Bezier handles, I hold down the Alt key. Then I'll reflect, copy, and join that shape. In real life, the turret has, I think, 8 of these arch windows spaced across its entire circumference. I'm going to simplify that and just have 3. I'll draw the middle one first using the pen tool. For the other 2, I'll copy the first one I've just done, but we'll use the shear transform to warp the shape to suggest it's at an angle. I just need to play around to find the best sort of angle. And when happy, I'll just reflect the new shape to make that third arch. To space them, first I brought them together, and because we've enabled smart guides, they click together nicely. Then I just nudged the angled arches away using the cursor arrow a couple of times. The last detail is the spire using the pen tool. With all the tower elements aligned correctly, I'll grab them all with the selection tool and Alt drag to create a duplicate of the entire tower. I'll position that more or less in place, then group these first 2 towers together, make sure they're aligned with each other and also aligned with the front wall. When I'm happy with that, I'll copy the front 2 towers as a grouped object, and this will become my rear pair once they're scaled down and put into position. It's coming together nicely. I'm going to ignore these parts of the structure in the background just to simplify things. So that just leaves to draw what I'll call these small domes. I'll employ exactly the same methods I've used before to complete one and then duplicate it. I'm fairly happy with that now, so I want to prepare it for After Effects. So I'm just going to select everything and scale it down to fit within the artboard, using Shift to keep everything in proportion. With this preset, with a project intended for video, the artboard doesn't have the white background by default. So just to clarify, this is the artboard boundary. There is a thin line there, but it may be difficult to see with the screen capture. When we import the project into After Effects, anything beyond the edge of the artboard will not be accessible. The other thing I've noticed is that although I created different layers while I was drawing and labeled them, I forgot to actually check my new paths were being placed within those layers. Whoops. Not to worry, that's why we check these things. All I'll do to fix this is go through and switch layers on and off to see what they are and drag them to where they should be. Again, just to be clear, if you're working solely in Illustrator, this may not be standard. I've seen lots of graphic designers' projects where everything is all on one layer with no titles to describe what it is, whatever works for you. However, when you bring the project into After Effects, you will only be able to animate different elements separately if they exist on separate layers within Illustrator. And you absolutely need that control. If it's just one layer, you can't differentiate. Right now, I'm not entirely sure what order I'll animate the layers in. I'll decide that in After Effects, but I definitely want to have options. I noticed I got the perspective on these windows the wrong way around, so I'll just correct that. Of course, while I'm doing this voiceover, I've realized that I haven't noticed until now that these windows in the towers are also wrong. So I'll change that for the next iteration. In terms of colors, you can define everything in After Effects, but I'm going to change the stroke color in Illustrator as it will save me time. I think I'll use the colors of the flag of India, making the stroke this deep saffron color. I'll use this color scheme JPEG as my reference. I'll download it and place the reference on my pasteboard. The pasteboard, incidentally, is all the area that is outside the artboard. I'll sample that color, open the color picker and copy the exact hex value for that color. Then I'll select everything on my artboard, open the stroke color and paste that hex value into it and save that. Now I've opened After Effects, and from within the project panel, just press Ctrl+I or Command+I on a Mac to import. I'll navigate to the Illustrator project, and before I import the project, ensure Import As is set to Composition Retain Layer Sizes. After Effects has made this composition 25 frames per second and 12 seconds in duration because those were the last values I used when I created a comp in After Effects. That will be fine for me, but you can change that, of course. And when we open up the comp, we can see all those separate layers in Illustrator have now become layers in After Effects. And each one of those is independent of the others. So you can probably see now that if we just placed everything within one layer in Illustrator, we'd now be looking at just one layer in After Effects, which would be no good at all. Since our Illustrator project contained the reference image and color scheme layers, they've also been created, but we don't need the photo anymore, so I'll delete that. The color scheme, if you remember, I placed outside the artboard on the pasteboard. So although a layer has been created, I called it Ref in Illustrator, the contents of that layer, the color scheme JPEG, are not accessible in After Effects. As I said, anything from your Illustrator project that you want to work with within After Effects needs to be within the bounds of the artboard area. I'll just delete the ref layer and import the color scheme again in case I need it. Next, I'll save this After Effects project. The paths of the Taj Mahal building are going to need to sit above a solid color layer. I'll use a color from the flag color scheme. The white, which is pure white, or the blue are the best options, I think. However, the white is too much, it's dazzling. This blue is going to work much better. I can sample straight from my color scheme. It's going to give the composition a kind of blueprint kind of vibe, which I like. Now we can start to animate, but before we do, we need to convert the layers. When they're imported from Illustrator, as these are vector shapes, After Effects can only interact with them in a limited way. If you twirl open these Illustrator layers, you see only the most basic transformations are available: anchor point, position, scale, rotation, opacity. Although sometimes that will be absolutely adequate, on this occasion we need more than that. I'll select all my Illustrator layers, right click and choose Create Shape from Vector Layer. All those Illustrator layers now have a new corresponding After Effects shape layer, which is what we'll animate. You can now delete the Illustrator layers. Now, when we twirl down these new shape layers, we can see immediately that there are so many more parameters we can control. And for us, the key thing we'll be animating is the stroke. We'll do that by adding a trim path to each stroke we want to animate. I'm not sure of the exact order, but I know I want the main dome to be first, so I'll switch off the visibility of all the other layers just to make it easy to see what I'm doing. I'll switch the other layers back on when I come to animate them. I'll change the stroke width to 3. Incidentally, I've also realized after the fact that instead of switching off the visibility for all the other layers, I can in fact just solo the visibility of the layer I'm interested in, or the layers I'm interested in as I go further along the process, by pressing this button. I'll do that next time. So all I need to do is go to the Add button and choose to add a trim path. That creates a new parameter for this layer, Trim Path 1, which gives me 3 properties to work with: Start, End, Offset. For the most basic animation version, I'm just going to be working with the End property. Assuming the other values are unmodified, when the trim path End is at 0%, it's empty. When it reaches 100%, it's complete, fully revealed. So simply by adding keyframes to reflect those 2 values, you create an animation in which the stroke will be revealed. Here's a little tip if you're new to After Effects. Since I know for now I'm just going to be interested in the first second or so of the comp, I'll press N to set the work area to end somewhere around the 2-second mark. That will then loop the playback at that point rather than playing through to the end of the timeline on the comp. You can do the same thing by sliding the little work area handles above the timeline to make your work area in and out point exactly where you want. 20 frames seems about right for this path. I'll make those easy ease keyframes by selecting them and pressing F9. Then I'll start thinking about which layer should go next, so it seems to follow a pleasing order. I'll go with the main building. On this layer there's several groups of paths, but they can all be animated by one trim path. Then it's just a case of tinkering with timings. You can choose to trim the individual shapes simultaneously or individually. Individually makes it feel too rushed, so I'll leave it set to simultaneously. I want to change the stroke width for all the strokes on this layer, but as we know there's several groups of strokes. Rather than twirl down for each group, I'll select the layer, then in the timeline panel I'll type width in the search bar, and immediately all the parameters that include the text width for the highlighted layer are displayed. I'll select the stroke width for each group, and then with them all selected, if I change the value of any single one of them, they'll all change. So then I'm just going to carry on deciding the order in which I'll reveal the layers, timing them so as one layer is animated, the next is underway. I'll add a trim path and change the width of some of the parts of the building that are closer. I'll finish with the spire on top of the main dome. The whole animation takes just over 8 seconds, but you can make it go faster or slower to your taste. And of course, for every Easy Ease keyframe, you can step into the graph editor and tweak those Bezier handles as much as you like to refine the easing. I'm just blitzing through this. So the basic variation is done, but let's make it a bit more interesting. I'll duplicate the comp to make Taj Mahal 2. And now I'll set the trim path end value at 50% for the first keyframe and 100 for the second. If you leave it like that, it starts its animation half complete. But if you then animate the start value so it begins at 0% on the first keyframe and reaches 50% on the second, you get this effect, which is kind of nice, as if they're chasing each other. Now, if I add an offset and animate that value from 0 at the first keyframe and 1 at the second, because the value of the offset is measured in degrees, it adds this flickering. I'll reduce the length of the animation considerably so the flicker is very brief. And that of course just means bringing the second keyframe closer to the first one. Because the animation currently finishes with the start value at 50%, it looks only half complete. So I'll add another keyframe to the start, one frame after the current second one, and make this 100%. So the stroke is fully visible. I'm not sure why I added a keyframe to the end value. I set that at 0% and it's not going to make any difference as the start value is 100, so just ignore that. However, do go ahead and increase the stroke width. I changed mine to 15 as I want it much thicker, as this will suit the next effect. I also selected all the keyframes and moved them along by one frame. Then I added a new keyframe to begin the animation. This keyframe was for the end value and set it at 0%. So the animation begins from scratch. As the flickering on effect looks kind of like a neon tube switching on, I'm going to drop a glow effect onto the layer. I'll set the glow radius at 50. I think I've left the other values at their default. That looks pretty cool. Now I just need to do that to the other layers. I'll select my dome layer, which has the glow effect applied, then click on the glow effect in the effects control panel and press Ctrl+C to copy that. I'll then select all the other layers except the background and simply press Ctrl+V to paste that glow effect onto them. That's been applied to those other layers. You can see that by twirling down any layer. But as the stroke width is currently narrow, it's difficult to see the effect make a difference, so I'll change the stroke widths. I also need to shorten the animation plus change the keyframes to give it that flicker effect. So add the start values and the offset like I did in the previous layer, and the extra keyframe for the 100% start value to complete the path. And then I'll just make those changes to the other layers as well. And I realized that to speed things up, I can just select and then copy all those new trim path keyframes for that flicker effect and paste them onto another layer, just slightly offsetting the layers so everything does not happen at exactly the same instant. So I've finished all that, and I realized I need to fix one little problem for all the other layers I've just done. Since as things stand, the first keyframe for the trim path end value is currently 50%, all the animations will begin with those layers at 50%, so halfway visible. That's not what we want. We want to make them all begin their animation completely invisible. It's an easy fix. I just need to add one additional keyframe to the end value, one frame before the 50% keyframe. That new keyframe needs to be set at 0% to make the layer invisible until the animation starts. Okay, that's more like it. It starts with just the background layer and nothing visible of the Taj Mahal strokes. And then the trim parts give us that flicker animation, and it's fully revealed in about 1 second. Nice. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope it inspires you to give it a try, maybe on the Taj Mahal, maybe on any building you'd like. There were a few little mistakes along the way, but to be completely honest, it's the little mistakes and figuring out why something's going wrong that will really, really underline the learning for you. That's certainly the case for me. It really helps me to learn things by actually doing them and then figuring out where I'm going wrong. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to smash that like button and leave a comment.